Imagine living in a time where a single rumor could cost you your life. European witch hunts from the 15th to the 17th century were more horrific than you can imagine. Being accused meant that you were already dead and there was no escape. This wasn't some dystopian fantasy. This was a time where neighbors turned on each other, children accused their parents, and thousands got executed. Picture this. You wake one morning to find your neighbors refusing to meet your eye. The butcher shortchanges you. Children scatter when you walk by. Yesterday you were part of the community. Today they're crossing themselves when you pass. This wasn't paranoia, it was daily reality in 16th century Europe. The continent was already drowning in fear. The 100 Years' War bled France dry. The Little Ice Age killed crops across Germany. Plague carts rolled through London weekly. People needed explanations for their suffering, and the church provided one. Satan walks among us. Not as metaphor, as literal truth. Priests preached that any misfortune, from stillborn calves to bad harvests, could be the devil's work through human hands. In 1486, Heinrich Kramer published the Malleus Maleficarum. This wasn't just another theological text, it became the witch hunter's Bible. The book laid out exact signs of witchcraft, unusual markings on skin, the ability to withstand pain, even just living alone. It instructed judges on interrogation techniques and specified that women were far more likely to be witches, calling them intellectually like children. Here's how quickly suspicion spreads. In 1588, a Bavarian woman named Apollonia Klinger coughed during Mass. The sermon happened to be about demons entering through mouths. By sundown, 3 witnesses claimed they'd seen her spit black mist. Within a week, she confessed to cursing livestock after being hung by her wrists for 9 hours. Modern studies of witch trial records show something terrifying. Areas with crop failures had 73% higher accusation rates than stable regions. Village tensions mattered too. 84% of accused witches in surviving English records had ongoing property disputes with their accusers. The pattern was clear. When people suffered, they needed someone to blame. By 1600, merely keeping herbs for medicine could doom you. Midwives were especially vulnerable. If a mother or baby died, everyone remembered the strange woman who handled blood and birth. In Essex, England, 75% of accused witches were unmarried or widowed women past childbearing age. Having no husband to vouch for you made accusations stick. This wasn't accidental hysteria. The system worked exactly as designed. Church and state officials knew fear kept people obedient. German Bishop Johann von Schönenberg openly wrote that witch trials made the common folk more devout. Local lords used accusations to seize lands. In the Basque region, over 60% of burned witches owned property that reverted to feudal lords. So when someone pointed at you and whispered, "Witch," there was no recourse. Your fate was sealed the moment people started looking at you differently. Some begged for mercy, others tried to run. But as we'll see next, neither option worked for long. It began with something ordinary. A neighbor's milk soured overnight. A child woke up with fever. Maybe you'd argued over a fence line last summer. In 1591, a Scottish woman named Isabel Young faced exactly this. After refusing to lend her sieve, the borrower's bread failed to rise. 3 days later, Isabel stood accused of cursing the dough. The accusations followed predictable patterns. Over 80% targeted women, usually past 40. Many were healers or midwives. Their knowledge of herbs made them suspicious. In Lorraine, a region dense with witch trials, court records show that nearly half of accused women lived alone. Without a husband or father to vouch for them, their guilt was assumed. Even prominent women weren't safe. In 1590, Anna Colden Bekier, respected Copenhagen merchant's widow, was burned after a teenage girl claimed her spirit appeared at night. Children's words carried terrifying weight. During the Würzburg trials, a 7-year-old's nightmare about a witch riding him led to 6 executions. Parents weren't exempt. In 1662, Swedish pastor Lars Elvius watched his own daughter testify against him. The supposed proof? She'd seen him fly to satanic gatherings after bedtime. Once the whisper started, logic vanished. In 1595, German miller Hans Schmidt swore his neighbor hexed his livestock. As proof, he noted that she'd once greeted his cow, which died 3 weeks later. The court accepted this as evidence. Scholars examining Swiss trial records found that 60% of cases relied solely on such post hoc reasoning. If misfortune followed an encounter, witchcraft caused it. The accused faced an impossible choice. Denying the charges proved your guilt. Only witches lied. Confessing might bring mercy if you implicated others. This created deadly chains. In Bamberg, a single accusation in 1627 spiraled into 300 executions within 18 months. Some tried to flee, but escape was rare. Towns posted witch identifiers outside their gates. Descriptions circulated like wanted posters. In 1586, English cunning woman Alice Nutter made it 10 miles before a tavern keeper recognized her from a broadside detailing her devil's marks. Here's what sealed most fates: property. When widow Brigitta Hock sold her late husband's fertile fields in 1611, the buyer's crops failed that autumn. Her land was forfeited upon execution. Tax records from Trier show that accused witches' holdings were 3 times the village average. The dynamics were brutally simple. As historian Lyndall Roper notes, witchcraft accusations functioned as the revenge of the vulnerable. Those least able to defend themselves, old women, the poor, outsiders bore the brunt. In a world where every personal tragedy needed a culprit, suspicion itself became proof. But being named was just the start. What came next wasn't justice. It was ritualized brutality, designed to extract one thing above all: a confession. And as we'll see, the methods they used could break anyone. The moment they took you to the interrogation chamber, everyone already knew how this would end. The question wasn't whether you'd confess, but how long you'd hold out before admitting to impossible crimes. In 1592, Strasbourg, Agnes Müller lasted 15 minutes in the strappado before confessing to nightly flights with Satan. This torture device hoisted victims by wrists tied behind their back, dislocating shoulders within minutes. Remarkably, judges considered this method merciful. At least it was quick. Sleep deprivation worked better for extracting elaborate confessions. After 2 nights without rest, a Scottish woman named Marjorie Jackson described in vivid detail how she poisoned wells with toad venom. By the 4th day, hallucinating prisoners routinely confessed to attending massive witch gatherings that never occurred. Modern studies show most people break after 72 hours without sleep. Interrogators rarely needed that long. Then came the swimming test, a masterpiece of cruel deception. They'd strip you naked, tie your right thumb to your left toe, and throw you in deep water. Float, and you were guilty. The pure water rejected Satan's servant. Sink, and you were innocent, except you'd likely drown before they hauled you out. In 1583, English court records note a rare survivor. When Widow Bonham sank immediately, bystanders fished her out unconscious. The judge ruled this proved witchcraft too. She'd turned the water against itself. Thumbscrews crushed bone systematically. Starting lightly, they'd increase pressure each time you denied the charges. In 1618, German carpenter Hans Weber confessed to transforming into a wolf after just 3 turns of the screw. Executioners kept meticulous logs. The Nuremberg witch jail's records show 87% of accused broke before reaching maximum pressure. The most terrifying aspect? These weren't private ordeals. Townspeople packed the torture chambers as if attending a sermon. In 1589, Basel, officials charged admission to watch interrogations. The louder your screams, the larger the crowd. Children attended alongside adults, learning early how dissent was handled. After witnessing her neighbor's strappado session in 1605, 10-year-old Anna Meiger immediately accused her own aunt. Some victims tried gaming the system. Experienced prisoners knew confessing quickly might mean a quicker death. In 1631, Würzburg, elderly Greta Himmel offered to name other witches in exchange for beheading rather than burning. But even this rarely helped. Interrogation manuals advised torturing confessors further to test sincerity. Priest Heinrich Kramer wrote that true witches couldn't recall all their crimes without assistance, meaning more pain. The rare surviving torture ledgers reveal disturbing patterns. In Eichstätt, Bavaria, executioners noted which tools worked best per demographic. Elderly women broke fastest under thumbscrews, younger victims during forced sleeplessness. Some accounts show prisoners begging to confess earlier in the process. One scribbled, "I will say anything," on his cell wall before interrogation even began. By the time they finished with you weren't just admitting to flying or casting spells. You described kissing Satan's anus, sacrificing babies, or controlling storms. In 1596, Lorraine, a blacksmith's detailed confession about leading 300 witches became prosecution handbook material, despite the man having no legs and being unable to walk. These weren't truth-seeking sessions. They were theater, with priests nodding solemnly as you screamed impossible stories into the record. And once the script was complete, one final scene remained, the spectacle that would cement your confession's lesson for everyone who'd watched. How do you defend yourself when the court assumes you're guilty before you speak? Witch trials inverted justice completely. The accused had to prove they weren't witches, an impossible task when even ordinary behavior could be twisted into evidence. Take the case of Giles Corey in Salem, 1692. When teenage accuser Ann Putnam claimed his spectre pinched her during the night, no physical proof was needed. His protests meant nothing. Spectral evidence required no witnesses, no logic, just someone's word that your ghost had misbehaved. The numbers tell the story. In Würzburg, Germany, records show 94% of accused witches were executed. In Scotland's North Berwick trials, the rate hit 98%. Compare that to murder trials of the same era, where conviction rates hovered around 40%. The disparity wasn't accidental. Judges often doubled as local priests. Men like Pierre de l'Ancre, who burned 80 people in labor without legal training. Their guide wasn't law, but texts like the Malleus Maleficarum, which declared witchcraft a crime exceptum, requiring no standard evidence. Defending yourself made things worse. In 1589, Lorraine, a woman named Claudia Bella tried explaining she'd been home the night witnesses claimed she attended a witch's Sabbath. The judge ruled her detailed alibi proved Satan helped her travel invisibly. Legal counsel was forbidden in most regions. When a lawyer in Eichstätt attempted to defend a client in 1628, he was immediately arrested as a witch himself. Denial became proof of guilt. Confession, even if coerced through torture, was the only path to a quicker death. The trial format ensured convictions. Judges would ask leading questions. When did you first consort with the devil? Answering never meant you were lying. Agreeing implied guilt. Some courts used touch tests. If a victim's fits stopped when the accused touched them, it proved they'd caused the affliction. In 1645, Essex, elderly Elizabeth Clark was convicted after a paralyzed girl momentarily moved her fingers during such a test. The girl's subsequent relapse was ignored. Witness testimony was weaponized. Children as young as 5 were permitted to testify, often coached by adults. In the Basque country, a 7-year-old's description of witches flying on goats led to 300 executions. The most damning witnesses were often fellow accused witches, promised leniency if they implicated others. Records from Trier show 60% of trial witnesses were themselves prisoners facing torture. Appeals were nearly impossible. When physician Johannes Junius protested his 1628 conviction in Bamberg, prison guards burned his appeal letter. Authorities feared higher courts might intervene. In 1595, a Vienna judge dismissed cases against 27 women, calling the evidence dreams and old wives' tales. Local bishops had him removed from the bench within weeks. The trials weren't fact-finding missions. They were rituals reinforcing community fears. Each conviction proved witchcraft was real, justifying more arrests. In Fulda, Germany, the first execution in 1603 sparked hysteria that consumed 250 lives in 4 years. Towns competed for zeal. After Eichstätt burned its 274th witch in 1630, neighboring districts increased their own burnings to avoid looking soft on Satan. And once judgment was passed, there remained only one question: how loudly your death would scream its warning to others. The answer usually involved fire. The executions weren't just about killing witches, they were public theaters designed to teach unforgettable lessons. Methods varied by region. Hanging in England, beheading in France, but burning dominated Germany and Scotland. The choice wasn't arbitrary. Fire purified evil, just as it had for heretics since medieval times. In 1610, Dresden, executioners placed gunpowder pouches around condemned witches' necks, not from mercy, but to ensure the crowd saw their heads snap back dramatically when ignited. Preparations were completely humiliated. They shaved victims bald to search for devil's marks, then paraded them naked through towns. Bremen accounts describe prisoners forced to wear glued-on paper hats, scrawled with mocking slogans. Sometimes relatives had to pay for these degradations. Zurich's executioners charged families for rope, firewood, even the nails used to secure victims to stakes. In 1596, Basel, a widow's children sold their home to cover her execution costs before she'd even been tried. Children attended as mandatory spectators. Schoolmasters in 17th century Germany recorded taking classes to burnings as moral instruction after watching a 1626 execution. 8-year-old Hans Schmidt accused his grandmother when she scolded him. She burned 3 weeks later. The message sank deep. In 1631, Lindheim, villagers stoned a woman who dared plead for a condemned neighbor shortly before her own accusation. Some victims tried cheating the flames. In 1600 Würzburg, elderly Margaretha Braun jumped into the pyre before the executioner could tie her. She'd seen how wind often blew fire away from victims, prolonging agony. Records show executioners learned countermeasures. By 1650, most German burnings used iron cages to keep witches suspended directly over flames. The aftermath could be surreal. French villagers in 1610 held a feast after burning Marguerite Halde, only to blame her revenge curse when crops failed next season. German executioners developed side businesses, selling witch ashes as protective charms. Execution notes from Westphalia show families sometimes had to pay extra if relatives screamed too much, as this disturbed the peace. Rituals reinforced conformity. In Sweden, witnesses swore they saw witches vanish mid-flame, proof Satan reclaimed them. Scottish ministers pronounced burning witches during thunderstorms proved their power over weather. Executions became village holidays. 1620 Nuremberg broadsheets advertised upcoming burnings like market days, complete with recommended viewing spots. Property seizures continued post-execution. Swiss records reveal officials auctioning victims' belongings at the execution site. One Bern constable kept meticulous logs showing he profited 20% above salary from these sales. Families inherited debts too. In 1588, Alsace, a man worked 7 years to pay his executed mother's court fees. The numbers stagger. German historian Wolfgang Berenger calculates that single executioners like Heinrich Schultheis oversaw 350+ burnings. Small towns like Obermarchtal, population 700, executed 45 witches in 3 years. Estimates suggest over 50,000 died Europe-wide, not counting those who perished in prisons or during torture. Yet the terror worked exactly as intended. After Lindheim burned 30 villages in 1631, court records note decades passed before another witchcraft accusation arose. As one Frankfurt pastor wrote in 1582, "One good burning quiets 100 whisperers," because once people saw what happened to those called witches, they understood the true cost of standing out or speaking up. If this glimpse into the darkness of history grips you, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay tuned for more unsettling truths. What if the witchcraft accusations weren't really about magic at all? Behind the screams and smoke, the witch hunts served more practical purposes. When wealthy widow Barbara Helfenstein burned in Würzburg in 1629, the local bishop seized her vineyards within hours. Property records across Europe show this wasn't unusual. In the German region of Westphalia, 60% of executed witches were landowners without male heirs. Their assets reverted to church or state authorities after execution. The pattern repeats everywhere. In 1588 Scotland, Laird Hugh Ross of Balnagowan accused 7 elderly women after they refused to sell him their coastal fishing rights. All were burned within months. Ross took control of the lucrative waters. French notarial records show similar cases. When 3 sisters in Lorraine inherited prime farmland in 1615, a neighboring family accused them of blighting crops. Within a year, the accusers owned that land. Local officials wielded accusations like weapons. In 1631, Bamberg, Mayor Johannes Junius found himself imprisoned as a witch after criticizing the bishop's taxes. His case wasn't unique. Trier Archbishop Johann von Schönenberg eliminated political opponents by having them named in tortured prisoners' confessions. One surviving letter from 1587 shows a village mayor writing to the bishop, "The miller who protests our grain tariffs, might he not be examined for witch marks?" The church benefited most. After executing witches, priests collected donations from terrified parishioners for protection prayers. In Reichstadt, church income tripled during peak hunting years. When doubting voices arose, like Cologne physician Johann Weyer, who questioned witch beliefs in 1563, the church banned his books and amplified stories of demonic threats. Attendance at exorcisms became mandatory in some parishes, spectacles that inevitably sparked new accusations. Economic crises accelerated the hunts. Study Swiss records from the 1620s famines. Accusations spiked 400% in struggling dairy regions. When milk yields dropped, communities often targeted lone cheesemakers. Their specialized knowledge seemed suspicious. In one Bernese village, execution records note that after burning their local cheesemaker, officials distributed her saved gold coins to accusers for their troubles. Even children became tools. In Sweden's 1668 Mora Panic, estate records show families accusing neighbors just before harvest failures would have forced them to repay grain debts. The accusers' debts were forgiven post-execution. Some parents coached children to name creditors as witches. One 9-year-old's testimony led to 6 executions, cancelling his family's substantial wool debts. The system fed itself. Each execution created new orphans and widows, perfect future targets. In 1652 Salzburg, authorities burned a widow, then seized her teenage daughter as a witch's child. When she inherited nothing, they accused her of cursing the judge's horse. Executioners' logs from this period show entire families being processed sequentially, with each death making the next accusation easier. What we're seeing isn't medieval superstition, it's institutionalized greed. The witchcraft trials operated like a macabre wealth transfer scheme, sanctioned by church and state. Every execution solved someone's problem: a land dispute, a political rival, an inconvenient debt. The actual magic wasn't in broomsticks or potions, but in how easily fear could be weaponized to make inconvenient people disappear. Which raises an uncomfortable question. When societies feel threatened today, who becomes the modern equivalent of the powerless woman with desirable property? The tactics change, but the human instincts driving them don't. The witch hunts reveal an uncomfortable truth about human nature: how easily fear turns into violence when given permission. Those 50,000 deaths weren't caused by medieval superstition, but by calculated systems that rewarded accusers and silenced questioning. Today's whispers work the same way, they just wear different disguises. When we hear rumors about co-workers, neighbors, or public figures, we're facing the same choice those villagers did: spread the fire or question its source. History shows what happens when enough people choose the first option. What's your take on the terror of being accused of witchcraft? Let me know in the comments below.